Here. Hi everyone, I'm Amy Zellmer from Faces of TBI, and welcome to the Brain Health Online Summit Training Series. I'm a TBI survivor from a fall on the ice in February of 2014, and myself, along with Dr. Jeremy Schmidt from Minnesota Functional Neurology, we saw a need in the brain injury community for more training and education on alternative healthcare methods for those suffering from the lingering effects of a brain injury. Our goal is to help educate and bring awareness to this invisible injury that affects 2.8 million Americans each year and is the leading cause of death and disability worldwide. So each day we will be bringing you 3 to 4 speakers who will be sharing their experience either working with a brain injury patient or their own real life experience of living with a brain injury. Now today I am here with Doug Schmidt. He is a personal injury lawyer with 40 years experience representing the victims of concussion and traumatic brain injury. His law firm, the Schmidt Salita law team, has been a pioneer in the detection of concussion injuries resulting from motor vehicle collisions that have been overlooked by the medical community. He is recognized as one of the premier concussion and TBI injury lawyers. He has spoken extensively at seminars for chiropractors, medical doctors, and lawyers on subjects relating to TBI, and is the author of a publication entitled New Developments in Concussion and Mild Traumatic Brain Injuries. In addition to his legal interests, he is also actively involved in the issue of concussions in youth sport, especially hockey. He has worked many years on developing protocols for sideline recognition of concussions in youth hockey. So welcome to the summit. We are so glad to have you here today.
Hello, Amy, and thank you so much for letting me share my experience over the years that I've been trying to bring some justice to the victims of personal injuries involving concussions and traumatic brain injuries. For so many years, the whole world has been in the dark ages. Professional football was overlooking significant concussions and long-term residuals of those concussion injuries. They've been overlooked just as much in auto accident cases and in cases like yours where people fell and didn't really realize that they were suffering the effects of a concussion or a traumatic brain injury. My first real involvement, other than as a lawyer, was as president of District 6 Youth Hockey. We had 7,500 players in the district that I was involved with, and I toured from the Mayo Clinic some sideline concussion recognition protocol. We'd been in the dark. We were just as much in the dark then as professional football, as the other sports, as auto accidents, other traumatic injuries. And sad to say, even though there has been a significant step forward, particularly in the NFL and the NCAA with football players, we're still in the dark ages, deeply in the dark ages. My experience with the victims of car accidents over some 35, 40 years was that they were complaining of symptoms that were consistent with the post-traumatic syndrome. It was very clear that there was something wrong with them, and their doctors weren't focusing on it. The healthcare providers weren't focusing on it. Myself and other lawyers didn't know what to do about it. Today, my staff screens our auto accident victims, people that have been in moderate to severe car accidents for concussion symptoms, and we find that 60% of them show very positive for the symptoms of a post-concussion syndrome. Those symptoms, we use the Rivermead post-concussion questionnaire. And the Rivermead is very, very well respected in the medical community. It's used at the University of Minnesota as a screening tool. other places as a screening tool. It originally was published by the in the Journal of Neurology, and it lists the symptoms of a concussion, starting with headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, nausea, vomiting, noise sensitivity, light sensitivity, fatigue, sleep difficulty, poor memory, poor concentration, and so forth. And we use the numbering system to try to evaluate or quantify the severity of the symptom. The total score that you can get is 64, and we're finding people that are scoring 30 and 40, even in the high 40s, that have completely flown under the radar of the medical community. I find just a whole lot of kickback from medical doctors that are unwilling to recognize the basic literature, the basic findings in the medical literature about concussions and mild traumatic brain injuries. It stands to reason, as logical as it could be, definitionally, that somebody who has been unconscious is unconscious of the fact that they've been unconscious.
Right.
It's definitional. And doctors don't seem to realize that. Most certainly, emergency room doctors don't appreciate that. And we find, go ahead.
Do you find too that doctors ask them, did you hit your head? And would you really know if you hit your head in a car accident? You know, and if the airbag deployed, chances are you got hit in the face with an airbag. You know, I mean, it's just, it cracks me up. Were you unconscious and did you hit your head? Most people won't even know.
Let me take those one at a time. First of all, somebody who has been unconscious can't be conscious of their unconsciousness, as I've just indicated. Secondly, when you ask them, were you unconscious? The only way that you can fairly, honestly, and accurately get a medical history is to ask them the details about what happened, what they remember, and what they don't remember. I want to tell you a story. A couple of months ago, a client of mine came in, been in an accident where he was hit at 50 miles an hour. He was driving 50. Hit hard enough to do significant damage to the back of his van in the middle lane of a 3-lane. And he remembered being hit. When I asked him, how did you get your vehicle off the road and stopped, he had no idea. He had a recollection of his vehicle being stopped on the shoulder, and he remembered handing his driver's license to the patrol officer. Did he remember how the patrol officer got there? Did he remember lights and sirens? Did he remember seeing the squad car pulling behind him? No. He remembered nothing more than handing the driver's license. His next recollection was being at the next exit at the Holiday gas station. Do you know how you got there? Did you drive there? He had no idea. Well, tell me, do you remember, what were you doing at the Holiday station? He says, I was talking to the same patrol officer. About what? Well, the car that hit me apparently was a hit and run, and the local police, this was down in Rochester, Minnesota, the local police were giving chase. Somebody had apparently called the police, and the trooper was talking to local police. Do you remember the details of that conversation? No. What do you remember next? I remember waking up in my van. Where were you? At the Holiday gas station. Amy, can you imagine? This guy doesn't remember. He falls asleep in the middle of the afternoon, probably passed out.
Yeah.
And in serious condition. Nobody, the patrol officer doesn't screen him. He drives home from that, didn't even go to an emergency room. Now, let's take it to the next step of the analysis. Those people, he's one of those people that flew under the radar and went home. but with serious long-term consequences.
Right.
The medical literature recognizes that a significant number of people don't even seek medical help. Did you?
Oh yeah. Yep. I knew I wasn't okay.
Yeah. A lot of my clients, when they're confused and disoriented, you can't expect them to make good decisions as to whether they are in need of medical help. Now, let's talk about those that get to the emergency room. The American Journal of Emergency, the Academy of Emergency Medicine, last April of 2016, published an article that I thought was a blockbuster article. The thesis of that article was that emergency room doctors that are writing this article recognize the fact that they're not capable of making good diagnoses of whether a person has had a concussion injury or not. Why is that? It's very simple. First of all, most of those people are coming into the emergency room with a physical injury and a lot of pain.
Right.
That overshadows what's going on in their brain. Secondly, emergency room doctors expect those people in that condition to be in a state of shock. Now, if you got a patient in a state of shock, how are you going to do a sophisticated, even halfway accurate assessment of their concussion injury? It's impossible. Thirdly, they've probably been given a shot of Toradol or some other painkiller
Right.
that's numbing them down. Now, how's an emergency room doctor going to do a concussion assessment on somebody that's on pain meds? And fourthly, perhaps even the most important, is that it is well recognized in the literature, but poorly recognized in the medical community. Let me say that again. Well recognized in the medical literature, poorly recognized in everyday medicine, that the symptoms of a concussion frequently get progressively worse over a period of days and weeks later. Now, if your concussion symptoms are going to be twice as bad tomorrow, 4 times worse in 3 days, you can't expect the emergency room doctor that's seeing you 2 hours after the accident to pick up on any of it. And where does it go? When I lecture the chiropractors, I tell the chiropractors, you are in a wonderful, wonderful position to do something good for your patients, because you're seeing them 2 or 3 days later. You're maybe putting them on a schedule of chiropractic treatments 2 days a week, 3 days a week. You have a responsibility, a professional responsibility, to be sorting and screening for concussion injuries, because nobody else is doing it. And about the delay, about the progressive development, Mayo Clinic in its literature says that progressively develop over 7 to 10 days. I get insurance company doctors that are saying, well, if it didn't show up, if it's not documented in the emergency room, then it didn't happen. Well, my answer back to that is Justin Morneau, Joe Mauer, and Mitch Leidner. For those of you who are not sports fans, Joe Mauer got hit in the head on the baseball field, got up, ran to the dugout, and it was 3 days later before he was diagnosed, but he was diagnosed with a concussion so bad that he was out for 9 months. Mm-hmm. Justin Morneau slid into second and took a knee in the head. Same deal. Got up and ran off the field. He was out for almost that long a period of time. Mitch Leidner, our Gopher quarterback, took a hit to the head in the third quarter, finished the game. Yeah. Wait a minute. This is the quarterback finishing the game, calling signals well enough that the coaches on the side, an intellectual exercise, well enough that the coaches on the sideline didn't realize that there was anything significantly wrong. Physically, he was running and passing the ball better than 98% of the people in that stadium that are watching the game. So physically and mentally, there he was functioning. And it was not until 2 or 3 days later that they declared him to have a concussion bad enough that they kept him out of the next 2 games. It's just amazing.
And with Morneau and Maurer, I have sports geek friends that are like, yeah, and he's still not, they're not the same. Like their batting averages have gone down. They can tell that they're not the same player they used to be.
I want to talk a little bit about loss of consciousness as an indicator of concussion or traumatic brain injury. One of my Bibles, Amy, is Neuropsychological Assessment by Dr. Muriel Lezak. And this is the Bible. Over at the University of Minnesota, neuropsychologists that are doing neuropsychological testing are trained with this as the Bible. And the bottom line is that medical literature recognizes that post-traumatic amnesia is a better indicator of whether a person has had a significant concussion than loss of consciousness. Now let's talk about that. Post-traumatic amnesia is defined as the inability to remember significant facts or events after your traumatic injury. And the literature says that the longer the post-traumatic initial period of post-traumatic amnesia, the better indicator it is that you're having a serious concussion injury, way more so than loss of consciousness. People just don't get it that the boxer that gets knocked out in the ring may have a droopy head for a few minutes. They get him back to his feet and he can give his name, rank, and serial number and walk to the locker room. But then ask him the next day whether he remembers any of the fight or the event walking to the locker room or leaving the rink. He can't. That's post-traumatic amnesia. The literature recognizes the fact that post-traumatic amnesia is very frequently spotty, intermittent. My client in Rochester remembered getting hit, then blanked for how he got his car off to the side of the road, his van off to the side of the road. A spotty remembrance of interaction with the trooper, then didn't remember how he drove from there to the Holiday gas station. A spotty recollection of talking to the trooper. And then next thing he remembers is waking up. That I see that time and time and time again. People will remember the accident, sometimes even remember getting their car off to the shoulder, have no idea that no memory of the lights and sirens of the trooper, the lights and sirens of the ambulance that came and got them. Don't remember whether they walked into the emergency room or wheelchair or on a litter. Spotty, in and out. And that presents another challenge. And that is that I see so many clients that are going from intermittent in and out post-traumatic amnesia, lapses in memory, and then all of a sudden it morphs into that period where it's now more or less where did I leave my keys? Where did I park my car? Mm-hmm. How do you define the end of the period of post-traumatic amnesia when it morphs into a loss of memory? That's a very, very, very difficult thing. I want to give you a couple of examples. In the last year, I have settled cases anywhere from $350,000 to $900,000 for people that really deserved those settlements. where the $900,000 was a lady that was treated and released from the emergency room with no diagnosis of concussion.
Mhm.
She ended up having significant cognitive losses, tremendous change in personality, irritability, noise and light sensitivity, and visual problems. And another one for 500,000 that was treated at St. Mary's Hospital, Mayo Clinic, diagnosed with a concussion or a mild traumatic brain injury, and then ignored for 2 years until he fired his other lawyer and came to me. And by the time we got finished, we're, thank the Lord, able to retroactively document the nature of his disability and attribute that back to the brain injury that had gone untreated for almost 2 years and get him a fair settlement. In that case, his long-term residual was basically psychological or emotional, which led me into another area of research, which shows that a significant percentage of people that have had a concussion or mild traumatic brain injury are at increased risk for developing mania, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression. The research, the statistical studies show that people who have had a concussion are at as much as 4 times greater risk of later in life developing a significant psychological disorder. By the same token, there's literature that says that people that develop a seizure disorder after a head injury often start to develop that seizure order as much as 2 years later. So there are delayed problems. It's just not the football players that 20 years later are having severe dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. It's a big deal.
Yeah, and I hear all the time, I have a Facebook group and I hear all the time, gosh, I had a car accident 6 years ago. Do you think that's what's causing all my problems? Like they never ever got help for it. And there's always hope. You can always, get treatment. Even 6 years later, but it's sad how they did go under that radar after a car accident and never had any help.
And I haven't talked about balance disorders, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, BPPV, basically a balance disorder, and the visual problems. I want to give you another example. One of my cases recently involved a lady that was in an accident as a passenger. She and her husband drove home from the scene of the accident. She did not seek any medical attention until the next morning. She was in church. It was a Saturday accident. On Sunday morning, she's in church and she's miserable. And she's getting worse. And her husband took her to the emergency room. The emergency room doctors, this is in a small outstate town, and the clinic there provided the emergency room coverage. And so the doctor that saw her in the emergency room was one of the doctors from the clinic where she got her primary care. He diagnosed a neck and back injury and started treating, and an ankle injury, started treating the physical injuries. Nobody asked a single question to do any screening for a concussion. Nothing. And it was not until 3 months later that she was complaining to the doctor about her dizziness and so forth. And he wrote in the chart note, probably due secondary to the pain medications. Okay. Okay, didn't ask any more questions. So 2 weeks later, 3.5 months post-accident, she's seeing the podiatrist for her foot problem, and for the first time, the foot doctor diagnoses the head injury.
The irony
That's
there.
that's the foot doctor diagnoses the head injury. By the time we got finished working up the case, a well-respected neuro-ophthalmologist, Dr. Marion Rubenfeld, love her dearly, diagnosed a convergence disorder, slowed saccades, and a fourth nerve palsy of her eyes, and I'll get to that in a minute. And Dr. Meredith Adams, a neuro-otologist at the University of Minnesota, diagnosed a significant case of benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, super serious dizziness and balance problems. Now let's go back to that visual problem. I see a significant percent of my clients that have had a concussion injury having visual problems. Everybody knows, you count fingers after a football player on the sideline, how many fingers. From time immemorial, basic visual test has been recognized in the public as something you want to do, but not much more than that. Today, I am seeing a significant percentage of my concussion cases with blurred vision, with convergence disorder, with eye tracking problems, and some of them with even a nerve palsy. Now, let's take those one at a time. Convergence disorder is where a person has difficulty focusing from far to near and from near to far. And that's probably the most common visual disorder that we see as a post-concussion syndrome problem. I have one of my clients has a convergence disorder. He coaches a little league baseball team, and he's got this device that he uses to train his eyes for his own personal therapy, with a bead on a wire that he moves out and back to teach his eyes to focus near and far, to exercise them. And I have to tell you this, it's a great story. He decided to try letting his Little League baseball players use that device and see what it would do for their batting skills. Raised their batting average of the whole team.
That's awesome.
Yeah, great story. So anyway, so there's the convergence disorder. Then you've got the saccades, the slowing of the saccades. That's saccades. And any of you out there that don't know what saccades are, if you stop and think and scan the horizon, you'll realize that you jerk up the spot rather than a smooth movement, uninterrupted. We tend to focus as we scan. Well, slowed saccades is where people have a slowed ability to move their eyes back and forth to scan a horizon. Some of my clients have difficulty tracking the line on a printed page as they move from left to right, have trouble getting from the one line to the next line, and they get mixed up. And finally, the lady that was first diagnosed by her foot doctor had a fourth nerve palsy. And that is where your two eyes do not track together. Sometimes you may have seen somebody, very infrequently do you see that, one eye shoots off to the side and the two eyes just don't focus together. And that is a classic example or illustration of a fourth nerve palsy. So that kind of gives some examples of what we have been working with. Do you want me to talk about neuropsychological testing a little bit?
Yeah, I know the majority of people go through that at some point.
Well, it's very common in this day and age for a neurologist or a physical medicine doctor. I'm going to stop there. I find that physical medicine doctors are more attuned and astute to concussion injuries than the neurologists are even. Isn't that
I
amazing?
agree, in my experience.
Yes. So a lot of times medical doctors will use the neuropsychological testing as a screening tool for whether a person has a concussion. And sadly, many of the medical doctors consider that to be an end-all be-all when it's not. Of the 16 factors, symptoms of a concussion injury recognized on the Rivermead post-concussion questionnaire, from headaches, dizziness, irritability, so forth, of the 16, only 4 are measured by neuropsychological testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a client right now that was in an accident in North Dakota and has had speech impairment, has had irritability, headaches, depression. She tests out almost perfect on neuropsychological testing, but she still has a significant brain injury. Neuropsychological testing tests things like memory, comprehension, concentration, problem solving, and so forth. And I call neuropsychological testing a rule in, but not a rule out. In other words, if you have abnormal results on the neuropsychological testing, that's a pretty good indicator that you've had a concussion and that you have cognitive sequelae or problems from the from the concussion. However, the neuropsychological testing does nothing to test headaches, irritability, personality change, dizziness, nausea, balance, dizziness, and the other problems that can be real significant and disabling.
Right.
And so I fight that all the time. I fight the doctors say, well, there are doctors for the insurance company. In this case, the North Dakota case, I was saying, she did fine on the neuropsychological testing, therefore, she did not have a concussion injury.
I also think, if you don't have a baseline of the individual, the information isn't always valuable. Like, for me, I scored within average of a person my age. And I can tell you just from taking the test, I couldn't do some of the things that I know I would have been able to do before. So, it's kind of, it's not a super accurate test. And I like what you say, it's a rule in, not a rule out.
Mm-hmm. I had a client that actually was one of the 10 people that designed and support the iPhone. Well, had a bicycle accident, and she was functioning at the highest intellectual ability imaginable. And the studies show that people that start out with a high intellectual function don't typically show positive results on neuropsychological testing. You take somebody that is in the 1/100th of top 100%, and now all of a sudden they're testing out at 98th percentile. They can have a real big loss,
right?
But it doesn't show. So anyway, and I feel so bad for the victims of concussion that so often there's just not understood. And I'm going to tell you, Amy, I think that at least a diagnosis of a concussion is, you'd think it'd be the kiss of death, but it's actually, for my clients, it's actually something that is comforting to them because they react. I have been trying to figure out why everything's going crazy for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now they've got an answer. And it's your group of people that are helping people to understand that they're just not going crazy for no crazy reason.
Yes.
And this is normal for concussion victims.
So, every state has different laws regarding no fault with auto or personal injury, but what's your suggestion to someone who has either been in a car accident or an injury of some sort? Like, how does someone find the right lawyer to try to even seek help?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on that question. First of all, isn't it a sad state of affairs that, and it is true, that people need to find a lawyer to get help for a concussion injury?
No.
Hello? How crazy is that? And I'm going to tell you that I'm sad to say that there are not very many lawyers that understand and appreciate how to screen for a concussion injury. When I tell my lawyer friends that my staff screens with the Rivermead every person that has been in a moderate to severe car accident, they go, really? And I've yet to find another lawyer that does it. So these people that are these victims of concussion injury that are flying under the medical radar, sad to say, are flying under the legal radar just virtually every bit as much. All I can say is people are Googling for lawyers this day and age. You don't have to know anything about the law or medicine to buy a billboard.
Right.
Or to pay for an ad on TV. And to answer your question, grill the lawyer. Question, what's your experience? How many cases have you handled? What do you know about it? What doctors do you work with? So just be not afraid to ask the questions, ask for background.
Yeah. And sadly, so many people, I hear horrible stories. There's a woman who was riding a bicycle in a bicycle lane and was hit by a car. And because of the no fault laws, she got nothing. Like, she didn't have her own health care. So, she got nothing. No, she's like $1.5 million in debt for medical expenses. And to me, that just doesn't even seem right. That's a whole other conversation. But it's so sad, some of these cases. And, I think there's people who maybe never sought the help of a lawyer that should have. And so I encourage people to seek, almost all lawyers will give you a consultation. So
absolutely. Absolutely. And put them to their test. Ask them about actual cases. Ask them about experience. So I want to leave you with a funny true story vignette from one of my cases. I was in court in Hastings for a lady that had suffered a mild traumatic brain injury, and I'm asking her about her cognitive abilities, how it's affected her ability to read a newspaper, to understand what she's reading, to remember her span of concentration. How long can you read a book? And out of the blue, she says, from the witness stand, Well, that's probably the only good thing that's come out of this injury. She says, my budget for reading is a whole lot less because I can read the same novel three times like it's new.
Oh,
about that
reality.
about that time, the judge called a recess, and the defense lawyer and I were both walking to the men's room, and under his breath he said, "You put her up to that, didn't you, Doug?" And I go, "Absolutely."
So, Doug, you do have a free gift for our people listening. You have an ebook. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Minnesota is a no fault and at fault state, and that gets kind of confusing for people. So we have online a downloadable book called The ABCs of Minnesota No Fault and At Fault Insurance. And I was born and raised in Iowa, so I could make this joke against myself. I tell people that it was done in accordance with the Iowa Standard of Comprehension. And they say, "What's that?" And I say, "Speak slowly and use small words."
Oh, poor Iowa.
So we have done it in a very simple and understandable way. And those of you that might have any difficulty downloading it, just call my office and we'll send a hard copy out in the mail. I'll be happy to do that. I do have some other informational downloads on our website that might be helpful. I do have one, diagnosis and proof of cervical injuries, which I'm very proud of. It's a 50-page book about neck and back injuries. Chiropractors love it and claim that they get some benefit out of it as well, and some others as you can find. So we're happy to help.
Have all those links under this video for everyone watching. So any final thoughts, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Well, I want to leave you with one other vignette. One of the respected neurologists at one of the respected neurological clinics here has twice in medical records said there is no history of loss of consciousness. And then 2 sentences later says, patient remembers nothing of the scene of the accident. That's how silly it gets. If you don't remember events at the scene of the accident, how could you tell the doctor there was no loss of consciousness? So we just got to keep fighting the battle, Amy. That's all I say.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone who's part of the summit. And just always remember, you are not alone in brain injury.